So let's get into Trump's pardons, because at this point it's a sort of record level, bigly pardons, as he might put it. Now, as you pointed out, he pardoned all the January 6th participants on his first day. What was the sort of feeling when you heard that news from the news? What was the sort of reaction within the Justice Department at that point?
Well, to some extent, we saw it coming because the president had said on the campaign trail that he was going to do this. But it really did come as a shock that he did it so quickly after taking office and that the pardons were so sweeping. I think everyone believed or held out hope that she would, at minimum, draw some distinctions between the people who used violence in connection with the January 6th events and the people who didn't. And those distinctions in the end were not drawn. It was a blanket pardon of everyone. And the scope of it was really pretty shocking to myself and my colleagues in the Justice Department.
So that was one sort of job lot of pardons. Can you talk us through some other pardons, and also this phrase that you keep referring to on your Instagram channel, which I refer people to, Lawyer Oyer, which is how we discovered you. And it's really, you're so good at explaining all sorts of actually quite complicated, nuanced areas of the law. Can you talk us through the pardon economy?
Sure. Yeah. Donald Trump has monetized the pardon power in a way that no president in history ever has. He has essentially created a system that's a pay-for-play system to receive a pardon. Historically, pardoning applicants, for the most part, have been vetted by the Justice Department and go through a rigorous background investigation process before they're considered for a pardon. But in Donald Trump's world, what seems to matter most is political connections, loyalty, and money. So Donald Trump has been accepting pardon applications and granting pardons to people who are able to access him through political and financial channels. There are a couple of examples of this that really stand out. For example, there's an individual named Paul Wolsak. His mother was a major Republican donor, and she paid $1 million to go to a dinner with the president at Mar-a-Lago. And a few days later, her son received a full pardon from the president. The pardon spared him from having to go to jail, and it also spared him from having to pay back the money that he stole from the victims of his fraud. Most of the pardon recipients under Donald Trump have been people convicted of large-scale white-collar fraud crimes, and these are crimes that have had a drastic financial effect on the victims. They're crimes that have involved stealing money from investors, stealing money from taxpayers and the government, frauds on Medicare and Medicaid benefits. So things that have cost taxpayers and crime victims a great deal of money. And I have looked at all of the pardons that Trump has granted to date and kind of totaled up the aggregate financial losses. And they total over $1 billion, over $1.3 billion, actually, in losses to crime victims and taxpayers as a result of the offenses Trump has pardoned. And one of the things that is so unusual about the type of pardons he's granting is he is relieving the debts. He's forgiving the debts that are owed by these convicted white-collar offenders as part of the pardon. So he made it such that Paul Wolsak didn't have to pay back the money that he stole. He actually was skimming money from the tops of the paychecks that were going to the doctors and nurses that he employed in a healthcare company. And now he doesn't have to pay back that money. There's another individual named Trevor Milt.
So, Liz, I just want to be absolutely clear on this. Paul Wolsak, who was skimming doctors' and nurses' salaries, got forgiven by Donald Trump after his mother paid $1 million to have a dinner at Mar-a-Lago.
Yep, that's exactly right. The thing that's really struck me about the case is this is a case where Paul Wolsak had high-priced lawyers. He's from a wealthy family. They argued at his sentencing proceeding in front of the judge that he should not go to prison. And the judge who sentenced Paul Walsack to 18 months in prison said, "I need to impose this sentence to send the message that wealth is not a get-out-of-jail-free card in this country." And then, literally days later, Donald Trump sent the exact opposite message by wiping out the prison sentence as well as the financial obligations that Paul Walsack had because of his family wealth, because his mother was able to in order to attend this dinner. And Paul Walsack, by the way, he used that money to buy himself a yacht. He used it to shop at Bergdorf Goodman's and other high-end stores. So this is not the type of person that really screams out for that type of assistance. But in Donald Trump's world, the political connections and the money was enough to get him that benefit. And his is really just one of many examples of really egregious types of pardons that have been issued purely on the basis of political and financial connections under Donald Trump.
And that $1 million that Paul's mother paid for a dinner at Mar-a-Lago, where does that actually go?
Well, that's a good question. The New York Times has investigated that piece of it and did a really comprehensive story that kind of tracked the donation and where the money goes. But we're seeing that all of this money that various pardon applicants are paying is ending up in some form or fashion benefiting Donald Trump or people in his orbit. There's another individual named Trevor Milton who defrauded his investors in a startup company. He was supposedly going to build the world's first electric-powered semi-truck. It turned out that the whole company was a fraud. There was a video showing what was supposed to be a prototype of this truck actually working, and it turned out that it was some members of his team had pushed this truck down a hill to make it look like it worked. So it was a fraud, the whole thing. And Trevor Milton owed his investors over $600 million in lawsuits. He and his wife donated $1.8 million to Donald Trump's campaign. And shortly after, Milton got a full pardon from Donald Trump. So that's another illustration of this kind of pay-for-play system where by spending just under $2 million, Milton was able to wipe out a debt in excess of $600 million that he otherwise would have had to pay back to his investors. And the only people that benefit from that, Trevor Milton and Donald Trump. It's a loss for everyone else, for taxpayers, for crime victims, and for our justice system as a whole.
What is there any recourse for the victims here? I'm thinking of doctors and nurses. What recourse do they have? Or the investors, Trevor Milton's investors?
The only recourse for these victims is to file a civil lawsuit and to try to get their money back that way. But that's a very expensive and time-consuming process. There's actually a federal law in place that requires that people who commit financial crimes pay back their victims. And Donald Trump is undercutting that statute. He's basically saying that it has no effect by granting these pardons. Crime victims are not supposed to have to fight in court to get their money back. It's supposed to be an automatic part of the sentencing of the perpetrator of the crime. And it was in these cases, but Donald Trump essentially undid that debt, that obligation by granting the pardons. So if these crime victims want to pursue getting their money back, they have a costly legal fight ahead of them.
So basically, if you've committed a white-collar crime, all you have to do is give some money to Donald Trump or one of his cronies, and you get off. You don't have to pay anybody back, and you're free to go off and do it again.
It appears that way. It appears that it's a very good time to be a white-collar criminal because of this possibility of getting a pardon from Donald Trump. There has cropped up a whole pardon economy that extends beyond the president himself to people in his orbit with access to the president who are accepting huge amounts of money from people hoping to get a pardon in exchange for legal services and lobbying services. It's been reported that pardon seekers are paying, in many cases, $1 million or more for high-priced lawyers and lobbyists with connections to Donald Trump to try to get their applications to the front of the line on the president's desk. Some of these lawyers and lobbyists are being paid $1 million up front and then another $1 million if the application is successful. And this is creating really sort of a feeding frenzy around pardons. The pardoning process has become a completely financial transactional process, not something that is rooted in principles of law or justice.
This feels very much the behavior of tin pot regimes, the sort of regimes that Donald Trump, when he was first in power, referred to as shitholes.
What's happening now is very corrupt. It's really the definition of corruption. Selling the instruments of official office for personal gain is the definition of corruption. And that appears to be where the pardon power has gone. And it's not just detrimental to the crime victims and the taxpayers. It's also very unfair to the people who have legitimate applications for pardons that have been submitted through the ordinary process. There are right now somewhere around 14,000 people who have applied for pardons through the Justice Department whose applications are being ignored in favor of the wealthy and well-connected. And some of these are individuals who really do have compelling cases for second chances through clemency, but those folks don't have the ability to jump the line to access the president through Mar-a-Lago or through the Oval Office. And so those folks are losing out while people who are well-connected and wealthy are benefiting tremendously.